People think the loneliest place in the world is an empty house. It isn't. It's a maternity ward, when every other Omega has someone holding their hand. At 28, Rowan Hale arrived at St. Augustine Medical Center carrying a single overnight bag. 36 weeks pregnant. No family. No friends. No alpha beside him. Around him, hopeful couples whispered excitedly. Nervous alphas paced beside smiling Omegas. Rowan lowered his eyes and quietly joined the admissions line. The receptionist smiled kindly. "Welcome. Is someone coming to be with you today?" Rowan returned the practiced smile he'd perfected over 8 lonely months. "No." She hesitated. "And the baby's father? We're divorced." "I'm sorry." "So am I." The nurse entered Rowan's information into the hospital system. Suddenly, an alarm sounded. The screen flashed bright red. High priority protected patient emergency contact. Alpha Lucien Moretti. Rowan's heart stopped. "No." The nurse looked up. "Mr. Hale? Please don't call him. I'm afraid hospital policy requires us to notify your emergency contact. It's over between us. I'm sorry. The system won't let me continue your admission without making the call." Rowan closed his eyes. After a long silence, he whispered, "Do what you have to." Across Chicago, Alpha Mafia boss Lucien Moretti was leading a summit between the city's most powerful mafia families when his phone vibrated. He glanced at the caller ID, St. Augustine Medical Center. Without another word, he stood. Adon frowned. "We're discussing a $1 billion agreement." Lucien picked up his coat. "The meeting is over. My family needs me." The room fell silent, because no one had ever heard the feared mafia boss abandon business for family. Meanwhile, Rowan sat alone outside the maternity ward, unaware that the man he believed had abandoned him was already racing toward the hospital. Lucien reached St. Augustine in less than 15 minutes. Ignoring startled nurses and security guards, he stopped outside Rowan's room. Through the half-open door, he saw the Omega, sitting quietly on the examination bed, one hand resting protectively over his swollen stomach. His breath caught. Pregnant. Rowan was pregnant. 8 months ago, Lucien had signed divorce papers because rival mafia families planned to kidnap Rowan and force Lucien to surrender his territory. To protect him, Lucien had erased every public connection between them. He transferred Rowan's assets into secret trusts, assigned anonymous security, made the divorce appear real. He wanted Rowan alive, even if it meant Rowan hated him. He couldn't explain. Every call, message, and meeting had been monitored. One mistake could have gotten Rowan killed. So Lucien chose silence. Rowan chose heartbreak. Neither knew the other, still wore a wedding ring hidden beneath their clothes. The doctor stepped out of Rowan's room and froze when he saw Lucien. "Mr. Moretti? How is he?" "Physically exhausted, but stable." Lucien's eyes never left the doorway. "And the baby?" "The baby." The doctor hesitated. "We'll know more after additional scans." Lucien nodded and quietly entered. Rowan looked up. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Rowan's expression hardened. "You didn't have to come." Lucien stared at the hand protecting Rowan's stomach. His voice barely rose above a whisper. "Why didn't you tell me?" Rowan swallowed. "Because I thought you wanted a life without me." The words struck harder than any bullet. Before Lucien could answer, the monitoring machine suddenly sounded a sharp alarm. The doctor rushed back into the room. His face had turned pale. "We need to move now. Your baby is in distress." Nurses rushed into the room. "Prepare the operating theater. Call neonatal surgery." The sudden chaos left Rowan frozen. He instinctively wrapped both hands around his stomach. "The baby." The doctor knelt beside him. "We've detected a serious complication. We need to operate immediately." Rowan nodded weakly. "Will he survive?" "We're going to do everything we can." Lucien stepped forward, without hesitation. "What do you need from me?" The doctor looked at him. "There's a treatment. that may significantly improve the baby's chances. What treatment? A compatible alpha donor. Lucien answered before the doctor finished. I'm here. We haven't confirmed you're the biological father. I don't care. Everyone in the room fell silent. Lucien looked only at Rowan. If there's even a chance that child belongs to you, then he's already mine to protect. Rowan felt tears sting his eyes. For 8 months, he'd convinced himself Lucien wanted freedom. Yet the alpha hadn't asked a single question about bloodlines, DNA, or legal rights. He simply rolled up his sleeve. Take whatever you need. As nurses collected blood samples, another doctor hurried into the room, carrying a tablet. There's a problem. He turned the screen toward the head physician. Someone has accessed Mr. Hale's confidential medical records 17 times over the past 4 months. Rowan frowned. That isn't possible. It gets worse. The doctor enlarged a security image. A man wearing a visitor's badge had entered the maternity ward the previous evening. The badge was fake. Lucien's expression darkened. Find him. Hospital security immediately locked down the floor. As Rowan was wheeled toward surgery, he looked at Lucien. What is happening? Lucien gently squeezed his hand. I don't know yet. Then his voice became cold enough to freeze the hallway. But someone has been hunting my family. Lucien didn't leave the hospital. While Rowan was prepared for surgery, he reviewed every security recording from the past week. The fake visitor appeared 3 times. Different clothes, different names, same face. Then another discovery arrived. A forged authorization had opened Rowan's medical file repeatedly over the last 4 months. Someone had tracked the pregnancy from the beginning. Lucien's security chief entered quietly. We identified the payments. To whom? The fake visitor worked for a shell company. He placed a file on the table. Lucien opened it. His expression hardened. Vittorio Moretti. My uncle, he whispered. Years earlier, Lucien's late father had secretly rewritten the family's inheritance. If Lucien ever had a biological heir, control of the Moretti family's legitimate businesses would permanently leave Vittorio's branch. The pregnancy threatened everything Vittorio wanted. The divorce hadn't mattered. As long as Rowan carried Lucien's child, both remained targets. Lucien closed the file. I failed them. His chief shook his head. No, I thought hiding Rowan would keep him safe. Instead, Rowan had been hunted alone. Lucien looked toward the operating theater doors. I won't make that mistake again. Before anyone could respond, alarms suddenly echoed through the maternity floor. A nurse ran toward them. Her face was white with panic. Mr. Moretti, what happened? We have an armed intruder inside the hospital. Every corridor instantly locked down. Parents clutched newborns. Medical staff began rushing patients into secure rooms. Lucien reached for his weapon. Then the nurse whispered the words that froze everyone nearby. They're heading toward the newborn nursery. Rowan woke to shouting. Alarms echoed through the maternity ward. A nurse rushed past his room. They're evacuating the nursery. Despite the pain from surgery, Rowan forced himself upright. Before marrying Lucien, he'd volunteered as a neonatal nurse. He knew the ward better than most of the staff. They're going to the wrong place, he whispered. The frightened nurse stared at him. What? If someone wants to hurt Lucien's heir, security will protect me. He pushed himself out of bed. But the nursery is full of babies. Ignoring the sharp pain in his abdomen, Rowan led the nurses through a little-used service corridor. Take the incubators first. You two, emergency exit C. Keep the lights off. The staff followed instinctively. Within minutes, every newborn had been moved into a secure neonatal unit on another floor. The nursery stood completely empty. Seconds later, armed men burst through its doors. They found nothing. Outside, Lucien fought his way through the locked corridors until he spotted Rowan sitting against the wall, exhausted, cradling another Omega's sleeping baby. Relief flooded his face. You should be in bed. Rowan smiled weakly. So should half the parents on this floor. Lucian knelt beside him. You could have died. Rowan carefully handed the infant back to a nurse. They're somebody's whole world. I couldn't leave them. Lucian closed his eyes. In that moment, he remembered the quiet Omega, who used to volunteer at children's hospitals, long before becoming his husband. Not power, not beauty, not fate. This was why he'd fallen in love. Then his phone rang. His security chief spoke only one sentence. We caught one of the gunmen. And he just confessed who hired them. The gunman is talking, Lucian's security chief said. He named Vittorio Moretti. Lucian closed his eyes. My uncle. Within hours, hospital surveillance, financial records, and testimony from the captured attackers exposed the entire conspiracy. Vittorio had monitored Rowan's pregnancy for months. The divorce had never mattered. As long as Lucian had a biological heir, Vittorio's claim to the family's legitimate businesses would disappear forever. Federal agents arrested him before sunrise. His accounts were frozen, his properties searched. The empire he'd built through greed began collapsing. A nurse stepped into the waiting room. Mr. Moretti? Lucian stood so quickly his chair fell backward. The surgery was successful. Relief hit him so hard, his knees almost gave way. And Rowan? He's awake. Lucian entered the recovery room quietly. Rowan looked pale but smiled faintly. What about our son? The nurse wheeled over a tiny bassinet. Inside lay a sleeping baby, wrapped in a blue blanket. Lucian stared in silence. Then tears filled his eyes. He looks like you, Rowan whispered. Lucian gently touched the baby's tiny hand. I almost lost both of you. Rowan watched him for a long moment. I believed you stopped loving me. Lucian shook his head. I thought disappearing was the only way to keep you alive. Neither man spoke. Too much had happened. Too much still hurt. Finally, Rowan broke the silence. Our son deserves a father. Hope flickered across Lucian's face. Then Rowan added softly, whether I still have a husband, I haven't decided yet. Lucian nodded. I'll earn that answer. For the first time since the divorce, he understood that saving Rowan's life was only the beginning. Winning back his trust would take far longer. Lucian moved into the guest room after Rowan and their son came home. He never assumed forgiveness. Every night, he warmed bottles, changed diapers, walked the floor when the baby cried. He attended every pediatric appointment, even when business demanded otherwise. He quietly delegated mafia affairs to trusted lieutenants. For the first time in years, his family came before his empire. Rowan noticed, but he said little. One evening, after putting their son to sleep, Rowan found Lucian washing baby bottles in the kitchen. You don't have to do all this. Lucian smiled faintly. I know. Then why? Because I should have been here from the beginning. Silence settled between them. Finally, Rowan asked the question he'd carried for months. Why didn't you trust me with the truth? Lucian lowered his eyes. I thought protecting you meant making every decision myself. He looked back at Rowan. I never stopped to ask what you would have chosen. Rowan felt something inside him loosen. That was the first apology that truly mattered. Not because Lucian admitted he was wrong, because he finally understood why. Just then, a tiny cry came from the nursery. Their son had woken. Lucian walked over first. The baby blinked sleepily, then reached out with both tiny hands. Lucian offered one finger. The little boy grabbed it immediately and refused to let go. Lucian laughed through tears. I think he knows me. Rowan smiled for the first time in months. He knows who's been showing up every day. As Lucian gently rocked their son back to sleep, Rowan realized something unexpected. Love had never disappeared. Trust had. And unlike love, trust could only be rebuilt one ordinary day at a time. Weeks turned into months. Lucian never asked Rowan to come back to him. He simply stayed. He learned lullabies, burned more bottles than he cared to admit, missed mafia meetings to attend pediatric checkups. When reporters questioned his absence, he answered only once. My son is more important. Word spread quickly through Chicago. The feared mafia boss was stepping away from daily operations. He appointed independent leaders over the family's legitimate businesses and ordered investigations into violent factions his uncle had secretly protected. Power was no longer his priority. Peace was. One evening, Rowan found Lucian asleep in the nursery chair, their son resting against his chest. The sight stole his breath. This wasn't the alpha who had signed divorce papers. This was a father, a partner, a man who finally understood that love was proven in ordinary moments. Lucian woke and smiled awkwardly. I think I fell asleep first. You did. And he drooled on my shirt. Rowan laughed. Our son has excellent taste. For a while, they simply watched the baby sleep. Then Lucian spoke. I don't expect another chance. Rowan looked at him. But, may I court you again? Not come home. Not be my husband. Just a question. A choice. Rowan felt tears sting his eyes. The old Lucian would have decided for them both. This Lucian asked. Rowan smiled softly. You finally remembered how. Lucian frowned. How what? How to let me choose. For the first time since the divorce, Rowan reached across the space between them and took Lucian's hand. Neither of them noticed their son smiling in his sleep. They were too busy discovering that sometimes the longest journey home begins with a single respectful question. Vittorio Moretti spent the rest of his life in prison. The fortune he tried to protect funded children's hospitals, neonatal research, and shelters for vulnerable Omegas. Lucian never placed the Moretti name on a single building. The bravest person isn't the donor, he always said. It's the one walking through those hospital doors. Rowan became director of maternal emergency care at St. Augustine. Every frightened Omega who arrived alone found someone waiting beside them. No one was ever left to feel invisible. 3 years later, Rowan returned to the same admissions desk where everything had changed. A nervous pregnant Omega clutched an overnight bag. Were you scared when you came here alone? Rowan smiled gently. I thought I was. Before he could say more, a little boy raced through the hospital entrance. Papa! Rowan laughed as his son wrapped tiny arms around his legs. Lucian followed behind, carrying flowers instead of a briefcase. The nurses smiled knowingly. The chair beside Rowan remained occupied this time. The frightened Omega watched the small family together. You weren't really alone, were you? Rowan looked at Lucian, then at their son. No. I just didn't know the people who loved me were still finding their way back. Lucian slipped his hand into Rowan's. Years ago, he had abandoned $1 billion Mafia summit because the hospital called. Today, there were no emergencies, no enemies, no fear, just a husband, a father, and a promise finally fulfilled. The world remembered the day a pregnant Omega arrived at the hospital alone. Very few knew what happened afterward. A feared mafia boss learned that no empire would ever matter more than the family waiting behind a hospital door. And Rowan discovered that the greatest apology wasn't spoken once. It was lived. Every single day afterward.